The Jedi Order, guardians of the Republic, defenders of democracy, and keepers of the balance in the Force. That's how most people probably viewed them from the High Republic era until the very last days of the Clone Wars. But as many people are now finding out, there is a darker side to this well-meaning but ultimately flawed organization. One of the reasons why we've enjoyed covering the Acolytes so much recently is because we finally get to see the inner workings of the Jedi Order more clearly. Something that was only teased during the prequel trilogy and Clone Wars and now is finally being fleshed out further. In the show, we are confronted with an organization of individuals that are perceived as godlike heroes by the public, but suffer from the same desires and shortcomings that any sentient being faces. What happens when we give this group of individuals an overwhelming amount of power and responsibilities without any oversight? I hope by now the answer is kind of obvious. But here's the thing, we criticize the Jedi Order a lot. So what would we do if we were in charge of them? Well, I've often said that ideally, the Jedi, most Force sensitives, should just be isolated from society, where they could focus on controlling their powers by finding an internal wisdom and peace to guide them. I kind of really like this idea of way seekers. These are Jedi who basically become independent. They no longer follow the orders of the High Jedi Council, but they still follow the Jedi Code to a certain degree. Although I'm not really sure how good that went for Vernestra Rwoh. She is back in the Jedi Order now, but she's acting kind of weird, and I wonder if it was because she was a former Wayseeker. I also like the idea of the original Jedi living in the Tython system surrounded by gravitational anomalies and separated from the wider galaxy. Let the Jedi, let all the Force users balance each other out and watch over each other. Let's just make sure that us normal folks don't get caught in the crossfire, right? But then again, that would be a waste of their particular set of skills and talents. I think utilizing their Force powers in service to the galaxy in a non-peacekeeping role could actually be quite beneficial for everyone involved. And actually, the Jedi already had a system in place for this kind of role. You see, when Force-sensitive children are taken away from their parents, what often is not told to the parents is that their children might not actually become full-blown Jedi Knights. There's actually a good chance that by the time they make it to the Jedi Initiate stage, they might not even get selected as a Padawan. You see, some children are just not skilled enough or powerful enough in the Force, or perhaps they don't have the right mindset, personality, or even motivation to attract a mentor. It's a fear that almost every Jedi youngling has, even the most skilled and talented ones. It might surprise you, but Obi-Wan Kenobi as a child was quite rebellious and oftentimes didn't follow the rules. As a result, he was almost not selected by a Jedi Master. Now imagine how different Star Wars history would have been if that had happened. Luckily, Grandmaster Yoda probably sensed some potential and importance in this one youngling and paired him with an even more rebellious master in Qui-Gon Jinn. And that pairing actually straightened out Obi-Wan Kenobi quite a lot.
Do not defy the Council, Master, not again.
I shall do what I must, Obi-Wan.
Yoda's actually really brilliant for doing this. You know, don't try to stop a young man from rebelling, just change what he's rebelling against. You know, don't try to fight or resist nature, just redirect it towards another direction. Something we can all learn from, probably. But what would have happened if Obi-Wan Kenobi hadn't been paired with Qui-Gon Jinn? He would have actually been given over to the Council of Reassignment. Again, this is something that all younglings feared and dreaded, but you know, it wasn't that bad. You see, the Jedi Order actually has 4 different Jedi Councils that govern various aspects of the Order. The High Council is, of course, the ruling body. They make all of the larger decisions. The Council of Reassignment is sort of like human resources. You know, like, we're sorry, Alan. We had to let you go because you refused to wear pants on the job. Which is actually a true story that happened to me in my last job. Although the real reason I would find out later that I got fired was because I was talking shit about the CEO of the company behind his back. And in my defense, I was also talking shit to him directly at his face in meetings. Turned out to be the best decision I ever made. That company went downhill, had a bunch of scandals, and I became a YouTuber trapped inside of your phones. Anyway, the Council of Reassignment manages the Jedi Service Corps, and this is where the majority of unchosen initiates get to go. It's kind of like Major League Baseball's farm teams, or what NFL Europe used to be. Now, this might seem like a demotion for a lot of Jedi younglings. There's definitely a stigma against this. It's almost like, oh, you failed. You're not going to be a Jedi Knight, a fancy warrior who gets to swing his lightsaber around and travel the galaxy. But In a lot of ways, the Service Corps was better for certain Jedi, and I think they did a lot less harm than the wider Order did, and most of the things they did were actually quite beneficial to the galaxy. Now, the Jedi Service Corps was further broken down into different divisions. It differs between Legends and canon, but now in canon we have like one that's focused on medicine. They ran the hospital within the Jedi Temple and pioneered groundbreaking ways to use the Force in medicinal procedures. Like imagine getting a prostate exam through the Force. He had the Agricultural Corps as well, who maintained a series of greenhouses and farms that grew and researched plants with rare and unique qualities that maybe Grandmaster Yoda liked to smoke occasionally. You know, maybe you could become a researcher who cultivates a new type of plant that, I don't know, makes people happy or, you know, cures diseases. I mean, that, or you might be assigned to talking to a very sensitive plant that needs constant attention. I mean, it's really a mixed bag with the Agricultural Corps. I probably would not want to join this organization, now that I think about it. You also had what was known as the Exploration Corps, which officially is known as the Archaeological and Research Division. I feel like this is something Indiana Jones would have really enjoyed. I feel like the Exploration Corps is actually a window into what the Jedi Order could have been if they didn't take on so many political and security duties. I feel like this is an amazing use of the Jedi's powers and abilities. You see, this organization's main job, as the name states, is to travel to the peripherals of the galaxy, to unknown systems, and conduct research missions and archaeological digs. And it might not surprise you, but the Exploration Corps attracted some of the more adventurous and courageous Jedi. Also, individuals who knew how to handle themselves. They might never become Jedi Knights, per se, or sometimes I think Jedi Knights did join these expeditions, but this was kind of like a second chance to become a Jedi Knight for a lot of these younglings. And I think there's a lot less pressure placed on them when it comes to fighting, you know, dark side Force users or getting involved in political situations. This is just pure exploration and adventure. It's a lot of fun. The Exploration Corps was founded early on in the Jedi Order and Republic's joint cooperation. And without them, the Republic might have never grown to the size that it is now. Now, since the Exploration Corps was a very mobile unit and usually operated very far away from Coruscant, they were a little less rigid in their standards. Like, for instance, your usual titles like Jedi Master, Padawan, and Knight did not apply to this organization, and they actually would fly these ships called Praxium ships that basically served as mobile Jedi temples with classrooms, dojos, everything you really need to train a Jedi. In a lot of ways, it kind of reminds me of the Crucible that Professor Hu Yang flew on and, you know, would mentor the kids on when they're going to the gathering ceremony to get their first lightsaber. These Praxium ships were basically mobile Jedi temples that were spread all across the Outer Rim. And again, the further away from the core, the more relaxed I feel like these Jedi could be, and you would see much more natural relationships between Jedi mentors and mentees. You know, when you're only hanging out with the same people day in and day out and you have no one else to depend on, you have to develop a closer relationship, a more emotional attachment, and you know, that would probably come first before the Jedi Code in a lot of situations. The majority of the Jedi in the Exploration Corps were seekers first, individuals whose main job was to essentially recruit new Force sensitives for the Jedi Order. While there were well-kept and detailed records of Force sensitives in the core regions, oftentimes with the cooperation of medical facilities, you know, forget having any privacy over your medical records, right? In the peripherals, there were still plenty of untapped systems, potentially teaming with Force cults and Force sensitives. Now, to be clear, I'm not really a big fan of the entire Jedi Seeker phenomenon. As we see in the Acolytes, the Jedi trying to aggressively recruit individuals into their order can lead to some pretty gross abuses of power and also create unnecessary conflict. First of all, recruiting babies for me is just like a red line. I think that is just one of the most messed up and wrong things that the Jedi do. The Jedi, in their arrogance, believe that they can shape a child with their training and doctrine. They forget that some kids are just born volatile, and then others have a lot of baggage from their past history. You can only really do so much with nurture, because nurture only shapes what nature gives to us. Now, it's one thing to just accept a recruit that, you know, parents willingly give to the Jedi because they believe that their kid can have a better life, a better education and future. I mean, there's really not a lot of commerce going on in the Outer Rim. There's not a lot of economic activity. You know, not everyone wants to be a moisture farmer. But breaking into the compound of a group of Force Witches without their consent outside of Republic territory, mind you, was just a gross overstep by the organization and the Acolyte. Mother Coral was also kind of an asshole, but at least she's being an in her own house. She didn't go all the way to Coruscant to start with them at their temple, right? They came to her house and kicked the door down. But what Master Indara and her team were doing before they caused the Brendark incident, well, that was really cool. That was a good use of their abilities to survey our world because they detected some kind of weird phenomenon. That is what the Jedi should be doing. They should be exploring planets for new technology, new fauna, new flora, and, you know, any potential danger that can threaten Republic. These 4 Jedi remind me a lot of what the Exploration Corps should be doing. Now, in the early days of the Republic, when the hyperdrive was invented, there was still a huge problem with FTL travel. And that was just the sheer amount of things you could run into when traveling at such a pace. While large objects like planets and nebulas were a bit easier to map out, there were still trillions of smaller celestial objects that could prove to be a danger, from roaming comets to derelict space stations to just forgotten Tesla roadsters. Before the invention of navigational computers powerful enough to calculate safe routes, you had explorers like the Santeca clan who would, you know, perform micro jumps and also use probing droids to map out safe routes. But also a Jedi's precognition abilities, which allowed them to sense danger and deflect blaster bolts, was also incredibly useful in fighting these hyperspace routes. And therefore, a lot of the early hyperspace routes that were created in the galaxy were mapped out by Jedi Seekers in the Exploration Corp. Without the Jedi, so many planets in the galaxy would have never been connected, and there wouldn't have been regular trade and commerce. And I remember some of the first planets that were settled after Coruscant were actually settled by colony ships, and these were either sleeper vessels like the ones in Alien, where you basically are put into stasis and like maybe 1,000 years later you arrive because you don't have FTL speeds, or generational ships where maybe the first generation or the second generation don't make it, but you keep breeding and maybe the 10th generation makes it. Like in, I don't know if you guys have played Starfield, but there's like this one mission where you find this ship that finally makes it to its destination, but it arrives so much slower because FTL speed travel is invented while they're still transitioning across like large gaps of space. I thought that was a really cool little story, if you guys remember that one. But yeah, the Exploration Corps' ability to lay down hyperspace lanes is perhaps one of the most beneficial things they've done for the entire galaxy. Because without those connections, without economic, cultural trade of technology, then these are all just isolated planets that are doing their own thing, perhaps creating redundant technology that perhaps need the help of other planets. I mean, like if we look at the larger Star Wars galactic economy, there are planets like Mandalore, for instance, that have basically no fertile space to grow food anymore. So they heavily depend on imports from worlds that have a lot of fertile land. And at the same time, they have Beskar, so they can give that to other people. You know, you want to have these kind of trade systems. It makes the galaxy a better place for everyone. Now, this might seem like less interesting work than fighting the Sith, but the Jedi explorers saved countless spacers' lives by providing safe passage. This also allowed commerce and aid to flow from the center of the galaxy outwards, and also allowed pioneers, colonists, and settlers to venture out to new parts of the galaxy and set up new life with new opportunities. I think without hyperspace lanes, and I think if you're only depending on natural growth from colony ships, you would have seen a lot of these planets fail, or just not grow very fast at all. By simply just showing the way, the Jedi were able to spread the light of civilization all across the galaxy. And in this way, it makes sense that the Republic would trust the Jedi so much. In this role as explorers, they did a lot of good. Now, it should be noted, there's one part of the galaxy that the Jedi never really breached that much, and that's the unknown region of space. People theorize that this region of the galaxy was created by an elder race in an attempt to prevent the ruthless Rakan Infinite Empire from destroying them. This is all legends now. But anyway, the unknown region is covered in a high concentration of gravitational anomalies, making any type of travel in the region incredibly dangerous and risky. It's actually also very hard for larger civilizations to be created. Like, you're not going to see, you know, a faction with 100 planets. The Chiss Ascendancy was perhaps the most organized group in the region, and still relatively small by larger galactic standards. And the way hyperspace travel worked in this part of space is basically they use force sensitives. You could actually hop over to most space stations and just hire one of these guys. The Chiss had their own force sensitives that they basically recruited from their own numbers. I mean, this is a really highly secretive thing that they didn't let anyone else know, because it was It's kind of like a military secret for them. But yeah, basically most Force sensitives in the unknown region are not warriors or like monks. They're just navigators. This area of the galaxy developed without interference from the Jedi Order or the Sith, and as you can see, most Force sensitives in this area weren't turning into dark side warriors or supervillains who were destroying entire planets. They literally were just using the Force to make a little money, you know, which is not the most noble thing in the world, but it's a very like practical thing for them to do. I think most of us would actually do that if we had the Force, right? This is why I kind of have an issue with the Jedi Order. You know, I do believe that they are good intentioned, but their absolutist view of the Sith and the dark side is what ultimately created so much conflict in the galaxy. If you take a look at the unknown region and how Force users developed into a pretty harmless group of people, it makes you wonder what would have happened in the wider galaxy if Force users never grouped together into factions and, you know, fought each other. Or better yet, what if the Jedi just focused on using their abilities to explore and discover rather than try and control or piece their fellow citizens? During the High Republic period, there were actually officially Outer Rim exploration teams, and the position of Pathfinder was created for Jedi who led these teams, usually with the Pathfinder. Their sole job was to create more communication and hyperspace relays to make it easier for other people to travel. I wonder if that's actually what we see in the Acolyte here with these guys. These Jedi are clearly equipped with scanners and sample collection machines. They seem to have been trained for a survey job. If only this team had just followed their leader's orders more, perhaps the incident on Brendock could have unfolded in a completely different way. Well, actually, now that I think about it, one of the only reasons why a conflict erupted was because the Witches also had a very negative perception of the Jedi. An image that was built after many generations of persecution was levied against Force-using cults that didn't fall into line. You know, no matter how hard the Jedi try to be righteous as peacekeepers, they were still enforcing their will on other people who might not agree with them. And they're also enforcing the will of the Republic. And like Mother Anastasia says in that one episode,
someday those noble intentions you all have will destroy every Jedi in the galaxy.
Each time a Jedi Knight like Soul screws up, he endangers the entire organization and makes it much harder for them to do their job. And on the flip side, you know, if these young Jedi weren't taught to fear the dark side so much, maybe they wouldn't see it everywhere and be paranoid about Force cults that might have just a different view of how things should be done. More importantly, if you can prevent these Jedi from getting involved in conflict in the first place, it's also far less likely that you would have Jedi turning to the dark side. I think most Jedi turn to the dark side because of conflict, because life or death situation brings fear out of them, which is a completely natural thing to happen. I mean, it's only natural to be afraid when some dude in a cloak and helmet with a set of teeth floats down from the sky and then ignites a red lightsaber. So maybe training the Jedi not to think of themselves as warriors would be a good idea. Maybe it would be better for them to not put so much of an emphasis on lightsaber training and martial discipline. It would also be nice if the Jedi Order had special techniques to deal with their more emotional members, and instead of, you know, showing distrust, maybe talk to them, figure out what is going on with them, find the root of what makes them emotional and actually deal with it in a proper and healthy way. Maybe if the Jedi were trained this way, they would approach new situations and new people very differently. Without fear, but instead with curiosity and courage. You know, boldly go where no man has gone before. Well guys, I hope you enjoyed today's video. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. As usual, my name is Alan, reminding you that my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy. See you next time.